a dragon, a goat, 7 horns, total destruction, rebirth, a new heaven, a new earth. Revelation has it all. Come join me as I take a walk through the book of Revelation and see what was on John's mind in the island of Patmos. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible and Page. In the beginning, coffee, and lo, it was very good. And yes, it is very good. Today we continue our jaunt through the book of Revelation, Jesus' revelation to John. We're going to be looking at verses 8 through 11 of chapter 2, the church in Smyrna. We're calling this lesson to the persecuted church. Now, before we get started, there's a lot of information in my transcript that is not spoken to in this podcast. It's research that I just felt drawn to, and sometimes I get off in rabbit trails, and it might not have a direct impact on what I want to teach in the podcast, but it's useful information and it's good information. And in this lesson, I have a lot more information on Polycarp, Ignatius, and Irenaeus, 3 of the first church fathers that really helped shape our theology, building on the foundation laid by John and the other apostles. They're important. And maybe someday I will do a podcast dedicated to them, because I think much of the modern church has just blown right past the history of the 2nd century and the 3rd century. But anyway, regardless of that, today we are going to be talking to the church at Smyrna. And like I said, the title is Smyrna, the Persecuted Church. Now, Smyrna was located in Asia Minor, north of Ephesus. It's the second church address. John addressed Ephesus, and now he's going to address the church at Smyrna. It's one of the most prominent cities in the Roman Empire, as it was in the Greek Empire. Smyrna often competed with Ephesus for prominence in Asia Minor. It was well known for the games that they celebrated, emperor worship with. Think Olympic-style games. Smyrna was known for its strong loyalty to Rome and emperor worship. That was a big deal there. Christians who refused to worship the emperor were viewed as traitors, leading to severe persecution in that city. One famous example is Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, who was martyred around 155 A.D. He had been a disciple of John the Apostle. Now, emperor worship in Rome during the 1st century was a key part of the Roman religious life and political life. It involved the veneration of the Roman Empire as a divine or semi-divine figure, reinforcing loyalty to the state and unifying the vast empire under the emperor's rule. Now, as this was very, very much a big deal in Smyrna, Christianity was bound to butt heads with it. And in fact, that is indeed what happened. During this, from the end of the 1st century on, especially, Christians faced troubles in Smyrna because they would not bow their knee to the Roman emperor. Now, Jews wouldn't bow their knees to the Roman emperor either, but they were given a pass. When Rome engulfed Israel, out of respect for their ancient religious beliefs, they let them continue practicing their monotheistic religion. In the beginning, the first 3/4 of the 1st century perhaps, Christianity was considered by Rome to be a sect within Judaism. But as time went on, it became clearer and clearer that Christianity was something different and apart from Judaism, and Christians began to lose the protection of Rome for the practice of their religious belief. This was due to the fact that Rome saw them as different than Judaism, but also due to the fact that the Judaism and the religious leaders within Judaism were actively involved in trying to destroy Christianity. Jewish communities generally received exemptions from emperor worship, as I said. Christians refused to worship the emperor. That set them up for persecution. They saw emperor worship as idolatry. By the end of the first century, emperor worship had become so deeply ingrained in part of Roman life that it couldn't help but add to the tensions between Christianity and the Roman Empire. All right, let me get past this part here. All right, here we are. Revelations 2, 8 through 11. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write this. These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. All right, that's all there is. That's all he had to say to the church of Smyrna. The point of this short letter was to warn them of coming persecution, which approximately 30 years later resulted in the martyrdom of Polycarp, John's disciple, and the bishop of Smyrna. He was indeed an example of someone who was faithful even to the point of death. Another thought is that Polycarp may very well have been working in Smyrna when John wrote down this revelation and when it was first read to the church there. If that's indeed the case, then we can say well done to Polycarp. Why? Because Smyrna received no rebuke from Jesus. In this little letter, there is no rebuke. They're actually commended. I would say that Polycarp did an outstanding job on behalf of John there. He says in the open part, he says in part of his introduction, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. Of course, this is referring to Jesus. But it's also a statement pointing out that Smyrna itself had died and come back to life, giving this historic city a connection to Jesus. See, Smyrna was originally a prominent city in ancient Anatolia, think ancient Greece. Around the 3rd century BC, Smyrna was destroyed by the forces of King Lysimachus of Thrace. He was one of Alexander the Great's generals, and after Alexander's death, he fought for control of various territories, and after its destruction, Smyrna remained largely uninhabited for some time. Around 300 BC, the same person who destroyed it rebuilt Smyrna, planning a more strategic city layout. He established a new Greek-style city that became an important center of trade and culture. The city's location along the Aegean coast contributed to its prosperity, and it remained significant in the Hellenistic and Roman periods. And by the time of the Roman Empire, Smyrna had become one of the major cities. Again, as I said, it competed with Ephesus as one of the most prominent cities in Asia Minor within the Roman Empire. So, yes, Jesus died and came to life again, but that's also a salute to the fact that Smyrna had died and also come to life again. He goes on to say, I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Those are harsh words. In the 1st century, Christians were often persecuted by both the Roman authorities and certain Jewish groups. Early Christianity was viewed by many Jews as a sect within Judaism, but some Jewish leaders rejected the movement and worked against it. Eventually, Christianity began to be seen as something outside of Judaism and not related. The synagogue of Satan refers to a group within the Jewish community in Smyrna who were actively opposing Christians and slandering them. You might say that in the beginning, if you look at the beginning book of Acts, Saul of Tarsus, who later became Paul, would have been called a member of the synagogue of Satan. John's use of synagogue of Satan, it's not a blanket statement against all Jews, but targets those who are persecuting Christians. Smyrna's large and influential Jewish population persecuted Christians, slandering them in Roman court, aligning, therefore, with Satan against God's purposes. Now, Jesus used the same language about Jewish religious leaders who opposed him. Read this in John chapter 8. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I've come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of all lies. Yet because I tell you the truth, you don't believe me. Why don't you believe me? Well, whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is you don't belong to God. Some Jewish religious leaders throughout the Roman Empire actually worked with Roman authorities to imprison, punish, or suppress Christians, particularly in the early church. Some followed Paul wherever he went, causing trouble. However, not all Jews opposed Christianity, and many Jewish people became followers of Jesus. Now, the Jewish elite, the Sadducees, actually had a working relationship with the Romans. They did whatever they had to do to stay in power. The interesting thing to me is that even after Rome destroyed their city, scattering Jews everywhere, destroyed Israel, destroyed the temple, destroyed Jerusalem, they dismantled the temple-centric Judaism, forcing Jews to flee and to scatter. There were still those that bore such hatred towards Christians that they would betray them to the very people who had destroyed them. Rome destroyed Judaism in the first century, temple-centric Judaism, destroyed Jerusalem, scattered Jewish people everywhere. And yet there were still Jewish people that were so full of hatred towards Christians that they worked with the people who had destroyed their nation. That gets to me. He goes on to say in verse 10, don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. There's going to be a very short and intense period of persecution coming, Smyrna. Stand by. But he says, be faithful even to the point of death, and I'll give you your life. I will give you life as your victor's crown. The phrase victor's crown tips its hats to the athletic games. Think again, Olympiad-style games. Another thing that Smyrna was known for. As a Hellenistic city, Smyrna hosted athletic competitions, modeled after the Olympic Games and other Greek festivals. These games included things like foot races, wrestling, boxing, chariot races. By the 1st century AD, Smyrna had totally embraced Roman imperial culture, which included these gladiatorial contests and these Olympiad contests. As a leading city in Asia, Smyrna often competed with Ephesus and Pergamum for preeminence. Hosting impressive games and festivals was their way of showcasing their wealth, their cultural status, and loyalty to Rome, drawing athletes and spectators from across the region. But the problem that Christians had with these popular games was these Roman games in Smyrna was pushing people to imperial worship. If you participated in these games, you would be called upon to perform acts of worship to the emperor. Of course, Christians opposed that. Refusing to participate in the emperor cult and public sacrifices made them targets of persecution. Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, as I've said before, was martyred. He was martyred in a public stadium around 155 AD. So, verse 11, he says, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who's victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. What is the Spirit saying to the churches? Well, the answer is in the second sentence. The one who's victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. I don't care what church age you're in, what church you're in, when you were born, this is for you. The one who's victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. The second death is the lake of fire, eternal torment, eternal separation from God, and separated from any hope of deliverance. And when is the final answer given to all this? Well, when we stand in the judgment before the Christ, before God, the Creator, there's going to be people who will say, Lord, we did all sorts of things for you. We prophesied, we healed. And he says, but depart from me, I never knew you. Depart from me to the fire prepared for the devil and his angels. To another group of people, he's going to say, hey, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, he gave me to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. And they'll say, but Lord, when did we do any of all this to you? He said, well, when you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. I can't stress strongly enough the importance of escaping the second death. There are many people that I know and believe are what I would call cultural Christians. It's kind of the thing to be. Here in America, we're not persecuted for being Christians. And on some levels, it's kind of considered necessary to do business. And you see people associating with the big mega churches because, well, that's where the cool people go. That's where the movers and the shakers go. It's not about worshiping God to them. And yet there are others who are part of the church and they see it for what it is, a place to worship the living God, the one who is, the one who was, the one who is to come. The place where you come and fellowship with your brothers and sisters, confessing your sins and praying for each other and sharing meals with each other. Loving God and loving your neighbor is important to those people. Those people will escape the second death. Now, what do I say in summary? Well, gosh, here's a verse that you'll never find in your promise box. The devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you'll suffer persecution for 10 days. The fact that persecution is guaranteed for the loyal believer, it's just a fact. It's a done deal. It's going to happen. It just happens in different degrees in different places, but persecution is going to happen. The true believers understand that on the other side of death's curtain is a glorious eternity, free from sin and evil. Persecution is temporary. Paradise is forever. Now, just as it was in the first and second century for the church, persecution takes many forms. Being ridiculed by the contemporary intellectuals, as was Paul, after his presentation to intellectuals in Mars Hill, to imprisonment, to beatings, to torture, to death. Around the world today, we see all of this. From the intellectual assault on the gospel here in the United States, to the imprisonment of believers in communist nations, to the blatant murders of Christians in some African nations, to all believers, the message is the same. Stay faithful and receive the victor's crown. To Smyrna, the persecuted church. To Burnt Hickory Baptist Church, my church. Stay faithful and receive the victor's crown. To the church you attend and to people you fellowship with, stay faithful and receive the victor's crown. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches today. Stay faithful and receive the victor's crown. It's a good place to stop. You're going to see here in a minute an address, an email address. You're going to see my URL for my Patreon account where you can join and become a member and receive all the materials that I use, that I've put together for these podcasts. And like I said, there's a lot in these transcripts that I don't share because I just don't have time. So I just leave it there. I'm Paige. Here's my coffee. Still good? Still good. Have a great day. God bless you. Bye-bye. Don't forget to join me at www.patreon.com/coffeebiblepage or my website, www.coffeebiblepage.com. Have a glorious and blessed day. Bye-bye.